The baker leaves day-old bread for struggling family nightly, unaware the kids would remember forever. This simple act of kindness was like planting seeds in winter ground, invisible at first but destined to grow into something magnificent beyond imagining. Marco Vitelli didn't consider himself anyone special. As he slipped out the back door of his bakery, paper bag clutched against his chest, his breath forming misty clouds in the December air. Just a middle-aged man with flour perpetually embedded beneath his fingernails, and a small bakery struggling to stay afloat in a neighborhood that had seen better days. But he had bread. Always too much bread, and someone needed it more than the dumpster did. 3 blocks away in a drafty 2-bedroom apartment, Diana Martinez pulled a threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders, trying to ignore the hollow ache in her stomach as she helped her younger siblings with homework at their rickety kitchen table. At 13, she had already mastered the art of distraction, of turning hunger into stories, of making her 8-year-old brother Miguel and 6-year-old sister Lucia forget they hadn't eaten since the meager school lunch hours earlier. "One more math problem, Miguelito, then we can get ready for bed," Diana said, her voice steady despite the dizziness that came in waves. Their mother was working her second shift at the hospital, cleaning rooms for patients who never saw her face. Their father had been gone 3 years now, first to prison, then to wherever men go when shame prevents them from returning home. The soft knock at their back door made all 3 children freeze. "It's probably just the wind," Diana whispered, though they all knew better. The knocking had come every night for the past week, always at the same time, always followed by footsteps hurrying away. Miguel slid from his chair. "I'll check." "Miguel, no!" Diana reached for him, but he was already at the door, turning the knob with trembling fingers. No one was there, but on the faded welcome mat sat a brown paper bag, the top folded over neatly. The warm, yeasty scent wafted up, making Miguel's eyes widen. He grabbed the bag and brought it inside, where Diana and Lucia crowded around him. Inside, 2 loaves of artisan bread, still slightly warm, a half-dozen rolls dusted with flour, and 4 sugar cookies shaped like stars. "It happened again," Lucia whispered, reaching for a cookie with reverent fingers. "The bread angel came back." Diana swallowed hard against the tightness in her throat. Pride warred with hunger, with gratitude, with the humiliation of needing this mysterious charity. But the smile breaking across her siblings' faces decided for her. "We'll save most for tomorrow," she said, breaking 1 loaf into 3 pieces. "But we can have some now." As they ate, Diana moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the empty sidewalk below, wondering about the shadow who left such precious gifts and disappeared without a word. Marco wiped down his counters with practiced efficiency, his movements mechanical after 26 years of the same routine. Vitelli's bakery had been his father's dream first, a slice of old-world Italy transplanted to this American neighborhood that had once bustled with factory workers and young families. Now the factory stood empty, and the families that remained struggled to make rent. Like his own family once had, after his father's heart gave out and left Marco, at 17, to support his mother and 3 younger sisters with nothing but his father's recipes and a mountain of debt. "You should sell this place," his sister Sophia had told him just last Sunday at their monthly family dinner. "This neighborhood is dying. You could get a decent price from developers, retire early." Marco had only smiled, passing her the bread basket. He couldn't explain that the bakery wasn't just a building or a business. It was his father's hands guiding his as they kneaded dough at 4 a.m. It was the memory of his mother's relief when they made their first profit after his father died. It was the smiles of regular customers who couldn't afford much, but saved for his cannoli on special occasions. "Orders ready for tomorrow's wholesale," said Javier, his only employee, wiping flour from his brow. The young man had shown up 3 years ago, hungry and desperate, reminding Marco too much of himself all those years ago. Now Javier handled most of the baking, while Marco managed the business and specialized orders. "Good work," Marco nodded. "You should head home." "Isn't Elisa working late tonight?" "Yeah, she won't be back until midnight." Javier hesitated. "Hey, we've got a lot of extra sourdough today." Marco met his assistant's eyes. They never discussed what happened to the day-old bread, though Javier surely noticed the careful way Marco set certain items aside, how they disappeared after closing. "I'll take care of it," Marco said simply. After Javier left, Marco gathered the day's surplus. Still perfectly good, just not fresh enough for paying customers with options. 2 artisan loaves, some rolls, and he added 4 sugar cookies on impulse. The little kids might like something sweet. He'd first noticed the family 3 weeks ago, a girl and 2 smaller children, waiting at the bus stop in clothes too thin for December, their faces pinched with a hunger he recognized too well. He'd watched them for several days before following them home one evening, noting their apartment building. The night after that, he'd left his first offering. Marco didn't want recognition or gratitude. He just couldn't bear the thought of children going hungry when he had perfectly good bread going to waste. Memories of his own hungry years after his father died had never quite faded. The gnawing emptiness, the dizziness, the shame. His mother working double shifts while he tried to keep the bakery alive. His sisters pretending they weren't hungry so he could eat. As he walked the now familiar 3 blocks, paper bag clutched against his chest, Marco wondered about the mother. He'd never seen her, only the 3 children. Working late, probably. Doing her best like his own mother had. He placed the bag gently on the welcome mat, knocked twice and hurried away, disappearing around the corner just as he heard the door creak open. For Diana, the mysterious bread deliveries became both salvation and burden. Salvation because they no longer went to bed with empty stomachs on the nights when Mama's paycheck stretched too thin. Burden because each delivery was a reminder that they couldn't manage on their own, that strangers could see their need. We should try to catch the bread angel, Miguel suggested one evening as they devoured fresh rolls with a thin tomato soup Diana had managed to make from canned ingredients. No, Diana said firmly. Whoever it is doesn't want to be seen. We should respect that. But curiosity gnawed at her almost as persistently as hunger once had. 2 weeks after the deliveries began, Diana positioned herself at the window 15 minutes before the usual time, peering through a crack in the blinds. At precisely 8:15, a figure approached. A man, middle-aged perhaps, in a dark coat, his head bowed against the cold. There was nothing remarkable about him except the gentleness with which he placed the bag on their mat, as if delivering something precious. Diana felt her chest tighten. She wanted to fling open the door, to say thank you, to ask why a stranger would care whether they ate. But some instinct held her back. There was dignity in his quiet giving, in the way he asked for nothing in return, not even recognition. She watched him disappear around the corner before she opened the door to retrieve the bag, which tonight contained a loaf of crusty bread, half a dozen muffins, and, her breath caught, a small paper box of cannoli. That night, after Miguel and Lucia had gone to bed with full bellies and sticky fingers from the rare treat, Diana sat at the kitchen table with her mother, who had arrived home exhausted from her shift. "Mama," Diana said hesitantly, "I need to tell you something." Elena Martinez looked up, dark circles prominent beneath her eyes. At 34, she looked a decade older, worn down by grief and endless work. "Someone's been leaving food for us," Diana continued, the words tumbling out. "Bread, mostly. Sometimes cookies or pastries. It's been happening for 2 weeks now." Her mother's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "You've been accepting food from a stranger? Diana, you know better." "It's good food, Mama," Diana insisted. "From a bakery, wrapped properly. And the monter." She swallowed. "And we needed it." Elena's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. Diana reached for her mother's hand, understanding the complicated tangle of gratitude and humiliation her mother must feel. The same she felt herself. "You should have told me," Elena whispered. "You work so hard already. I didn't want to worry you." Elena squeezed her daughter's hand. "Tomorrow we will find out who this person is and thank them properly. But we cannot continue to accept charity without acknowledgement." Diana nodded, though something inside her protested. The anonymity of their benefactor felt important somehow, as if naming him would break some delicate magic. The next evening, Elena arrived home early, determined to catch their mysterious donor. But 8:15 came and went with no knock at the door. "Perhaps they saw me waiting and were scared away," Elena said, disappointment evident in her voice. Diana didn't say what she suspected, that their bread angel somehow knew they were waiting and had deliberately stayed away. The thought made her sad in a way she couldn't quite explain. But the following night, when Elena was back at work, the knock came again at precisely 8:15. Winter deepened, and Marco's nightly deliveries became as much a part of his routine as opening the bakery at 5 a.m. He varied his offerings, sometimes focusing on heartier breads when the temperatures dropped below freezing, sometimes including special treats when he sensed the children might need their spirits lifted. He never saw them directly, always timing his approach to avoid detection. But occasionally he caught glimpses through windows. The girl helping the younger boy with homework, the little girl dancing around the kitchen. Once he saw a woman he assumed was their mother, her exhaustion evident even from a distance as she trudged up the apartment building steps after what must have been a long shift. Marco recognized in her the same bone-deep weariness his own mother had carried. One particularly bitter January night, as Marco approached the apartment building, a movement in the shadows startled him. He paused, bread bag clutched to his chest. "Why are you doing this?" The girl stepped forward, arms wrapped tightly around herself against the cold. Up close, she seemed both younger and older than he'd imagined. Young in her oversized coat, in the remnants of childhood in her round face, old in her wary eyes and the set of her shoulders. Marco's throat tightened. He hadn't prepared for this confrontation, had never planned what he might say if discovered. "The bread would just go to waste otherwise," he said finally, his voice rough with disuse. It was true, but not the whole truth. The girl, 13, maybe 14, studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away. "You're the baker," she said, not a question. Marco nodded. "Vitelli's, on Maple Street." "I'm Diana," she said, extending her hand with formal dignity that made his heart twist. "Thank you for feeding my family." Marco took her small hand briefly, noticing the chapped skin, the adult calluses forming. "Marco Vitelli." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sound of a siren and the whistle of wind between buildings. "My mother wants to thank you properly," Diana said finally. "She works at Memorial Hospital cleaning. She can't pay you back right now, but—" "No," Marco interrupted gently. "No payment. No thanks needed." Diana's eyebrows drew together. "But why? You don't know us." Marco looked down at the paper bag in his hands, then held it out to her. How could he explain what drove him? That every time he delivered bread to their doorstep, he was somehow delivering it to his own past self, to his hungry sisters, to his exhausted mother. "Someone helped my family once," he said simply. "When we needed it." Diana took the bag, her fingers brushing his. "Did you remember them? The people who helped you?" Marco thought of Mr. Abernathy, the landlord who had mysteriously forgotten to collect rent for 3 crucial months after his father died, giving them time to get the bakery profitable again. How that grace had quite literally saved them from homelessness. "Yes," he said softly. "I remember." Diana nodded as if confirming something to herself. "We'll remember too." Before Marco could respond, she darted forward and wrapped one arm around him in a quick, awkward hug, then turned and ran back inside, the bread bag clutched against her chest just as he had carried it. Marco stood motionless on the sidewalk, feeling as if something significant had just occurred, though he couldn't have explained exactly what. Spring came slowly that year, reluctantly relinquishing winter's grip on the city. The bread deliveries continued, though something had shifted since that January night. Now there were occasional notes tucked into the return paper bags. Simple childish drawings from Lucia, math test results from Miguel, once a carefully written thank you note from Elena that made Marco's eyes sting. He never responded in writing, but sometimes he included specific items that acknowledged their communications. Italian vocabulary flashcards tucked alongside biscotti after Diana mentioned she was taking Italian in school, heart-shaped cookies when Lucia's drawings showed their family surrounded by hearts. Diana no longer waited to catch him in the act, but sometimes she watched from the window, raising her hand in silent greeting as he walked away. This small acknowledgement, this gentle recognition of their unspoken connection, became precious to Marco in ways he hadn't anticipated. He learned more about them through these silent exchanges. That Miguel had asthma, that Elena worked double shifts on weekends, that Diana dreamed of becoming a doctor someday. What Marco didn't realize was how much the Martinez family had learned about him in return. Diana had made it her mission to know everything about their benefactor. Visiting Vitelli's bakery on her way home from school, watching Marco from behind the display cases as he served customers with quiet efficiency. She noticed how he slipped free cookies to children who pressed their noses against the glass, but never bought anything. How he knew every regular customer by name. How his rare smile transformed his careworn face. One April afternoon, as Diana stood hesitating outside the bakery, Marco glanced up and saw her through the window. Their eyes met, and after a moment's pause, he gestured for her to come inside. The bell above the door chimed as Diana entered, suddenly nervous. She had observed him from a distance for months, but this was different. Stepping into his world rather than him briefly entering hers. "Diana," he said simply, wiping flour-covered hands on his apron. "Mr. Vitelli," she replied, standing awkwardly by the door. He gestured to a small table in the corner. "Would you like something? A cannoli, perhaps? You seem to enjoy those." Diana blushed, remembering how she had specifically mentioned the cannoli in one of her notes. I don't have on the house," Marco said gently, already moving to the display case. 5 minutes later, Diana sat across from Marco, a cannoli and cup of hot chocolate before her. The bakery was empty except for Javier working in the back. The afternoon lull before the after-work rush. Your brother's asthma? Is it improving with the warmer weather? Marco asked. Diana nodded, taking a small bite of cannoli. The new medication helps too. Good. That's good. They fell silent. The weight of months of unspoken communication hanging between them. Why did you keep doing it? Diana finally asked. The question that had nagged at her since January. After I found out it was you, most people would have stopped. Marco considered this, turning his coffee cup slowly between his hands. I suppose because it still mattered. Whether you knew who I was or not didn't change that you needed the bread, and I had bread to give. Mama says we won't need help much longer, Diana said, her chin lifting slightly. She got promoted at the hospital. Better pay, better hours. Pride and something like disappointment mingled in Marco's chest. That's wonderful news. But I was thinking, Diana continued, her voice gaining confidence. Maybe I could work here, after school, to pay you back for everything. I'm good at math. I could run the register or help clean up or learn to bake. Marco blinked, surprised. Diana, you don't owe me. I know, she interrupted, but I want to learn. And Mama says I need to start saving for college if I want to be a doctor someday. Marco studied the determined young face across from him, recognizing the same stubborn pride he'd carried at her age. The need to earn one's way, to transform charity into honest exchange. You'd have to get work papers, he said finally. Since you're under 16, Diana's face lit up. I already got them from school, just in case. For the first time in their acquaintance, Marco laughed. A warm, genuine sound that transformed his face. You're a planner, aren't you? Someone has to be, Diana replied with a small smile. And Marco was struck by how much adult responsibility this child had already shouldered. All right, he agreed. 3 days a week after school? We'll start with counter service and basic cleanup. If you show aptitude, maybe some baking eventually. Diana extended her hand across the table, suddenly formal again. Thank you, Mr. Vitelli. Marco shook it solemnly, honoring her dignity. Thank you, Miss Martinez. Summer blazed into autumn, and Diana proved herself an exceptional employee. Quick to learn, unfailingly reliable, she brought a youthful energy to Vitelli's that had been missing for years. Regular customers adored her, charmed by her serious manner that occasionally broke into unexpected laughter. Marco continued the bread deliveries, but they evolved into something more like care packages. School supplies in September, warm gloves for all 3 children when October turned cold, special treats for holidays. Elena insisted on paying a nominal amount now that her new position afforded a bit more financial flexibility, and Marco accepted it to honor her pride, though he quietly added extra items worth far more than what she paid. Diana, meanwhile, absorbed everything Marco could teach her. She started with the cash register and cleaning, graduated to decorating cookies, then simple mixing and measuring. By November, she could shape a basic loaf, her small hands gaining strength with each batch of dough. You have a gift, Marco told her one afternoon as she expertly braided a loaf of challah, her fingers moving with natural rhythm. Your hands understand the dough. Diana ducked her head, pleased but embarrassed by the praise. I just practice what you show me. No, Marco shook his head. Some things can't be taught. They must be felt. After closing that evening, as Diana wiped down counters and Marco calculated the day's receipts, she asked a question that had lingered unspoken between them. Do you have children, Mr. Vitelli? Marco's pencil paused on the ledger. No, he said finally. I never married. But you have family, right? The people in the photographs? Diana gestured to the wall behind the register, where faded pictures showed various combinations of people at family gatherings. My sisters and their families. My mother before she passed. Marco closed the ledger. They're scattered now, Chicago, New Jersey, Florida. We get together at Christmas usually. Diana absorbed this, continuing her methodical cleaning. Didn't you ever want kids of your own? Marco smiled faintly. The bakery was my child, I suppose. By the time the business was stable enough that I could think about starting a family, I was already in my 40s. He shrugged. Life takes its own course sometimes. Diana considered this with the seriousness that characterized her approach to everything. I think you would have been a good father. Something caught in Marco's chest. A bittersweet pang of roads not taken, choices made long ago that couldn't be unmade. Thank you, Diana. She nodded once as if closing a book and returned to her cleaning. But her words lingered in Marco's mind long after she'd gone home, stirring emotions he usually kept carefully contained. Winter returned, marking a full year since the bread deliveries began. The Martinez family's circumstances had improved considerably. Elena's promotion had led to a slightly larger apartment in a better building. Miguel's asthma was well controlled with proper medication, and Lucia had blossomed in a gifted program at school. Diana continued working at the bakery, her role expanding as Marco increasingly trusted her judgment. The bread deliveries had become less about survival and more about connection, a bond forged in hardship that had evolved into something like family. One snowy December evening, as closing time approached, the bakery door opened with a gust of cold air. Marco looked up to find Elena Martinez standing there, holding Lucia's hand, with Miguel shifting nervously beside them. "Mrs. Martinez." Marco greeted her, wiping his hands on his apron. They had met briefly several times when Elena picked Diana up, but never had the entire family visited together. "Mr. Vitelli." Elena nodded, her manner formal despite the warmth in her eyes. "We've come with an invitation. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and we would be honored if you would join us for dinner." Marco blinked in surprise. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to intrude on your family celebration. It is because of you that we can celebrate properly this year," Elena said simply. "Please, we insist." Before Marco could formulate another polite refusal, Lucia broke free from her mother and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his flour-dusted waist. "Please come, Mr. Bread Angel," she said, using the name they had given him before knowing who he was. "Diana's making Italian cookies from your recipe and everything?" Marco looked helplessly at Diana, who was watching from behind the counter with an uncharacteristically vulnerable expression. "I told them you might have other plans," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "With your sisters, maybe." Marco thought of his quiet apartment above the bakery, the small artificial tree he'd put up out of habit rather than enthusiasm. His sisters had all chosen to celebrate with their in-laws this year. He wouldn't see them until after New Year's. "I would be honored to join you," he said finally, and was rewarded with Lucia's delighted squeal and Miguel's shy smile. 6 o'clock, Elena said, her formal demeanor softening slightly. "Diana knows the address." After they left, Diana approached Marco as he closed the register. "You don't have to come if you don't want to," she said quietly. "I know it might be awkward." Marco looked at her, the solemn girl who had grown 2 inches and gained immeasurable confidence in the year he'd known her. "I want to come," he said, surprising himself with the simple truth of it. Diana's answering smile lit something in his chest that had been cold for longer than he cared to remember. Christmas Eve with the Martinez family was nothing like the formal, somewhat strained holidays Marco remembered from recent years with his sisters. The apartment was modest but transformed by twinkling lights, paper snowflakes, and greenery Elena had brought home from hospital decorations being discarded. The meal was a fascinating cultural hybrid. Traditional tamales alongside an Italian lasagna Diana had insisted on making, having practiced the technique with Marco for weeks. Lucia chattered nonstop. Miguel demonstrated his improved lung capacity by playing Jingle Bells on a recorder, and Elena relaxed visibly as the evening progressed, the perpetual worry lines in her forehead softening. After dinner, as they sat with coffee and the Italian cookies Diana had indeed made from his recipe, Elena turned to Marco with unexpected directness. "You saved us last winter," she said simply. "Not just from hunger, but from despair. I want you to know that." Marco shook his head, uncomfortable with such direct gratitude. "I only shared what I had plenty of." "No," Elena insisted gently. "You gave dignity along with bread. You never made us feel like charity cases. You helped without humiliating us." Her eyes glistened. "That is a rare gift, Mr. Vitelli." Before Marco could respond, Miguel piped up. "Plus, the cookies were awesome." The tension broke as everyone laughed, and Marco felt something shift inside him, a loosening of the solitary habits he'd built around himself over decades. Later, as Marco prepared to leave, Diana handed him a carefully wrapped package. "It's from all of us," she said. "Merry Christmas." At home, Marco unwrapped the gift with careful fingers. Inside was a framed photograph he hadn't realized had been taken. Himself and Diana at the bakery, both dusted with flour, heads bent together over a braided loaf. Their expressions were identical, focused, peaceful, completely absorbed in the creation taking shape between them. Beneath the frame was a card signed by all 4 Martinez family members. Elena's elegant script, Miguel's careful printing, Lucia's flamboyant letters complete with hearts dotting the I's, and Diana's message written in the sure hand she developed marking bakery boxes. "Some people feed your body. The special ones feed your soul. Thank you for both. Love, Diana." Marco placed the frame on his bedside table, where it would be the first thing he saw each morning, and felt the fullness of a different kind of wealth than he'd ever counted before. Years passed, marked by bread and milestones. Diana graduated high school with honors and a partial scholarship to the state university. Marco helped fill the gap with a business investment that Elena reluctantly accepted after Diana argued fiercely that her years of training at the bakery made it a legitimate partnership rather than charity. In college, Diana called Marco weekly with updates on her pre-med studies. She worked at the bakery during breaks, her skills now matching his own in many respects. Miguel developed an unexpected talent for business, helping Marco modernize the bakery's accounting systems and establish a modest online presence. Lucia, artistic and dreamy, designed a new logo that Marco proudly displayed on the storefront. The bread deliveries had long since evolved into family dinners, holiday celebrations, shared victories and consolations. The Martinez family had become the family Marco never created for himself. Marco had become the stable father figure the children had lost. On a crisp autumn day, 10 years after that first bread delivery, Marco sat in a folding chair on the university quadrangle, squinting against the sun as he searched the sea of graduation caps for one particular face. Elena sat beside him, elegant in a navy dress she'd saved for months to purchase. Miguel and Lucia fidgeting on her other side. There she is! Lucia, now 16 and impossibly beautiful, pointed excitedly as Diana's name was called. Marco watched, his vision blurring slightly, as Diana Martinez crossed the stage to receive her medical school acceptance letter in the special ceremony for graduating pre-med students. Her face, glimpsed in profile as she shook the dean's hand, held the same serious determination he'd first seen a decade ago, now matured and focused. Later, as they celebrated at an actual restaurant rather than the bakery's back room, Diana pulled Marco aside. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a small box. Inside was a lapel pin, a small, perfect replica of a loaf of bread cast in silver. "I had it made specially," Diana explained. "I'm going to be wearing one just like it on my white coat when I start medical school. To remember." Marco looked at her, this remarkable young woman who had once been a hungry child on his doorstep. "I never thought," he began, then had to stop as emotion closed his throat. "I know," Diana said softly. "You never thought we'd remember the bread, but we always will." She hugged him then, no longer the awkward teenager, but a confident adult embracing the man who had changed her family's story with nothing more complicated than bread and kindness. "You know," Marco said when he could trust his voice again, "the bakery will need someone to run it in a few years, when these old hands can't knead dough anymore." Diana pulled back, searching his face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that doctors need backup plans, and the neighborhood needs good bread," he smiled. "And maybe someday, when you're established in your practice, you might want a place that's already yours. A family business." "You'd leave me the bakery?" Diana whispered, eyes wide. "Not leave," Marco corrected. "Share. Build upon. Continue." He touched the silver pin gently. "Some legacies are written in bread, not books." Diana's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "I'd be honored, but you have to promise to stick around and teach me everything you know. All the secret Vitelli recipes." "Martinez Vitelli recipes now," Marco corrected and was rewarded with Diana's laugh, the same sound that had transformed his solitary life into something rich with meaning a decade earlier. As they rejoined the family celebration, Marco reflected that he had once believed his life's work was simply baking bread. He hadn't understood that sometimes when you feed a hungry child, you're actually feeding your own future, creating a legacy that rises like well-kneaded dough, nourishing generations you never expected to touch. He had left day-old bread for a struggling family nightly, completely unaware that the kids would remember forever. But in remembering, they had given him something beyond price, the knowledge that his life, like his bread, had mattered in ways that would outlast him. And that was a kind of immortality that even the finest recipe couldn't provide.